Welcome to the Chalkboard, my fellow football nerds, for episode number 37 of Chalk Talk, brought to you by The Painted Lines. I'm your host, Shane Half, and you can follow me on Twitter at @halfandhalf_TPL. Today, we've got a great show lined up for you, reviewing every Week 18 game, talking about the playoff matchups, talking about the NFL coaching carousel that is now in motion. But before we get to that, this podcast is going out live on Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube. If you are watching live, please drop us a comment. We'd love to interact with you during the show. If you are watching later, we appreciate that too. Make sure you smash that subscribe button so you don't miss the next episode. We're also on Apple Podcasts, so if you could give us a 5-star rating and review, it would really help us out for the show. And so let's dive into it. We're going to start with the Eagles game against the Cowboys. Now, again, this wasn't the most meaningful game. The Cowboys played their starters. The Eagles did not. And so, there's limited things that you're going to be able to take away from this game. Let's blow it up here so you can see it just a little bit better. But Gardner Minshew gets the start for Philly. He goes 19 of 33 for 186 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Dak Prescott carved up the Eagles practice squad defense, throwing for 295 yards and 5 touchdowns. And so, where we were at is the Eagles didn't benefit from winning this game. There was no reason to risk their starters. Dallas most likely wouldn't benefit, but there was like a 13% chance they could improve their seeding. And so you've got to play your starters in that situation. And you can't feel great about the fact, if you're the Cowboys, that you were tied 17-17 in the late second quarter against what was essentially an all-second team. Now, the Dallas offense looked really good, which you would expect in this game. Again, they were playing against almost no starters. I think the only starter for the Eagles defense on the field was TJ Edwards, who is not, some elite linebacker. But the Dallas defense really struggled to handle the Eagles' second team, which can't make the Cowboys feel good. In this game, Devontae Smith played long enough to surpass Deshaun Jackson's rookie record from 2018 for receiving yards. Devontae Smith finishes the regular season with 916 yards. Now, he obviously did it in one more game than Deshaun Jackson did, but he did it in less targets and a more run-heavy offense. And so you can parse that how you will. There's going to be lots of records being set, single-season records with that extra game. So eventually we have to quit tagging those qualifiers on there that there was an extra game. But that's where we are at. Jason Kelsey also played in this game. He played one snap. Full brace up, everything. He came out, he did the first snap, and then he was off the field. But that increases him to 122 consecutive starts, which now puts him 40 shy of the franchise records held by, it's a tie between Harold Carmichael and John Dornbos. And so it would take 3 more seasons for Jason Kelsey to break that record. I don't think he's going to play that much longer, but the Eagles really hope that he will be back next season. We have Darthpool79 chiming in, says Rager looks as garbage as ever, and yet somehow J-Jaw makes Rager look acceptable. And you're kind of right. Jalen Rager finishes his day. It's telling that Rager played almost the entire game when none of the other starters, save Andre Dillard, who I guess is sort of an important player. He's not a starter, but Rager's out there with all these guys. It's obvious that Rager is not an important part of this offense. He finishes, despite playing almost the whole game, with 2 catches for 19 yards, and he also had 3 carries for 10 yards. And so on the day, he was given 5 touches, and he ends up with 29 yards, which is just pathetic. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside is targeted 3 times, and he gets 0 receptions, including that brutal drop in the end zone. And so I don't care if either of these guys are on the team next year. I'd like to see them both gone. I think Rager will be back given his draft position and it only being his second year, but J-Jaw has to go. In this game, Dak Prescott passed Tony Romo for the most touchdown passes in a season for the Cowboys with 37. And so Dak also benefits from that extra game. He sets a franchise record. So there were franchise records galore in this game. But let's talk about what we did see on the field. The first thing that we saw is Jason Huntley. Jason Huntley got called up from the practice squad. There was some buzz around him in training camp, and we saw that it was for a decent reason. He had a 35-yard kickoff return, which is already the second longest of the season for the Eagles. Jason Huntley should be on this active roster. And now with JJ Arcega-Whiteside going to IR, I think it opens up the opportunity for Huntley to be active in the playoffs. He's already shown more as a return man. And frankly, I would rather see him in the slot as a receiver or Gainwell in the slot as a receiver over some of these guys that are going to get playing time instead. So Jason Huntley had a good showing. I think he might have played himself into being active for the playoffs. And then again, we've already touched on it, but in a game where nobody played, Reagor was out there to the end. J-Jaw was out there to the end. Darth Poole on YouTube says Howie has to keep Reagor, otherwise he has to answer for that. Maybe. I think it's just one of those things where there's a bias towards first-round draft picks. The guy's going to get a third year because he was a first-round draft pick, and you hope you can salvage something out of that. I would rather see Quez Watkins as our wide receiver 3 and go pick up a vet in free agency or spend another early draft pick on a guy. But that's just me, and we'll get more into the draft as we go into this offseason. Another notable guy who was just terrible this year is Ryan Kerrigan. Ryan Kerrigan ends the year with the least amount of tackles of any defender in the entire league who played 20% of the snaps. That's right. Ryan Kerrigan played over 20% of the snaps for the Eagles, and he ends the year with 3 tackles, which is just horrific. And so Ryan Kerrigan, I mean, to be honest, I'd rather call somebody up from the practice squad or pick somebody up off of waivers than take this guy into a playoff game. But he's just shown nothing. This isn't exciting. I was kind of excited about when it happened. I thought Kerrigan could give a little bit of juice, and he's just been invisible all season. So the Eagles in the season with 25 rushing touchdowns, which is tied for the most in NFL history. They had, it was the most in the NFL this year. They had 2,715 rushing yards on the year, which is first place by over 150. They had more than 150 more rushing yards than the next closest team, which was the Colts. So the rushing attack is for real, and it's amazing that they've had such good results considering how little they ran the ball early in the year. They essentially threw the first quarter of the season out the window in terms of the running game. And so it'll be interesting to see as the season goes along, as we get into the playoffs, as we come into next year, if the Eagles have this same run-heavy approach or if they're able to diversify a little bit, because they're about to face a team in Tampa Bay, and this isn't the preview show, but they're about to face a team in Tampa Bay that's really good against the run. So I'm interested to see how that plays out. So let's move on to the Denver Broncos and the Kansas City Chiefs. Now the Chiefs win this game 28-24, a game that was a lot closer than people probably anticipated, especially with a guy like Drew Lock at quarterback. Drew Lock was abysmal in this game. He goes 12 of 24 for 162 yards. But Patrick Mahomes is the leading rusher for Kansas City. They just really couldn't get a lot going. And this was really a worst-case scenario for the Chiefs because they win the game, but it doesn't matter because Tennessee goes ahead and wins their game on Sunday. But both Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelsey were injured in this game. Hill was injured in warmups. Kelsey came up gimpy during the game. Now, I don't know if these guys are going to play. I haven't looked at injury reports yet because I'm not into preview mode. But if either one of those guys misses the first round of the playoffs because of this game, that's just devastating for the Chiefs. And so if you didn't watch this game, Denver was in control of this game. They were, with 8 minutes left, Denver has the ball on the 8-yard line. And they hand the ball off to Melvin Gordon, and he gets popped in the backfield by Melvin Ingram, just shoots off the gap, hits Ingram as he's getting the handoff, or hits Gordon as he's getting the handoff, and he fumbles the ball. Nick Bolton scoops it, and he returns it like 78, 79 yards for a touchdown. And so in that one play, the Chiefs went from a 32% chance to win to an 88% chance to win, and they never looked back. And so it's a disappointing result for Broncos fans who, last game of the year, you're not playing for anything, but you'd love to take down a division rival and hurt their playoff hopes. And it looked like they were going to do that, but they were unable to capitalize. And so Kansas City squeaks by in this one. Ultimately, it doesn't matter because Tennessee wins. The biggest thing that come out of this game will be those injuries to Hill and Kelsey, which we'll monitor as the week goes along. Darth Poole on YouTube says Manning is the next Mahomes is the next Brady / Manning and not Eli. Yeah, Mahomes is great. Nobody can argue against that. And I'm really interested to see the Chiefs in the playoffs here, as this is a team that a lot of people counted out after a bad start, and they've come roaring back. Obviously, you don't like to see them come into the playoffs barely getting by the Broncos, but it's a division game, and anything can happen. They get a pretty favorable first-round matchup against the Steelers, and so we will see what happens in that one. Moving on, we've got the Chicago Bears traveling to Minnesota to take on the Vikings. They lose 31-17. Kirk Cousins goes 14 of 22 for 250 yards and 3 touchdowns. Andy Dalton, 33 for 48 for 325 and a touchdown with 2 interceptions. With this game, Kirk Cousins goes over 4,000 passing yards for the third time in his 4 seasons in Minnesota. Ironically, 2019 is the one year that he did not go over 4,000 passing yards. And that's the only year from that tenure that Minnesota made the playoffs and Kirk Cousins made the Pro Bowl. You can think what you want about Kirk Cousins. This is the guy that breaks every advanced metric. Every advanced metric says he's a good quarterback. You put on the film, and he's not a good quarterback. He can put up numbers, but he's not a guy that you want leading your franchise. And you saw both the Vikings GM and head coach fall on the sword for the whole Kirk Cousins debacle, the amount of money that they invested into him to only have 1 playoff berth in 4 years. And so Minnesota cleans house. They will have a new GM. They will have a new coach next year. And you have to wonder if they're going to have a new quarterback as well. Moving on to the Carolina Panthers at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Tampa Bay wins this game handily, 41-17. Tom Brady looks sharp as ever, going 29 of 37 for 326 yards and 3 touchdowns. Sam Darnold looks as bad as always. The Panthers are really at a crossroads. They're going to have to figure out what to do at quarterback. Darth says that Cousins is like key lime pie. You think you want it, but you realize it's terrible as a dessert when you're finished. I'm more of a pecan pie guy myself. I'm not a big lime fan, but I can appreciate the analogy. Yeah, Cousins is he's not it. And, the Vikings can move him. They can stick with him for 1 more year. He'll be an interesting domino to follow in free agency. So back to this Buccaneers game. In this game, Tom Brady completed 21 of 22 passes that were thrown in under 2.5 seconds. Tom Brady is the epitome of, we use the term, check down king as a derogatory thing, like the quarterback can't push the ball downfield. But with Tom Brady, he's made a career out of it. And it's not that he can't push the ball downfield. It's that he so quickly diagnoses what you're doing. And he's so confident that they don't need explosive plays. They can take 5 yards a play and move the ball down the field. And like I said, 21 of 22 on passes thrown under 2.5 seconds. It's a bad matchup for the Eagles, who like to play soft zone coverage. They like to limit the explosive plays. Brady will pick that apart. And so we'll get into on the preview show some things the Eagles can do to try to move Tom Brady off of his game. But the reality is that Brady's career arc is just incredible. At 44 years old this season, Brady put up 5,316 passing yards, which is the 3rd most in NFL history, with the most completions, 485, and the 10th most touchdowns in a season with 43. And so at 44, Brady's not even showing signs of slowing down. I don't know. Can this guy play till he's 45, 46, 47? It's going to be interesting to follow his career arc and see what Tampa Bay, if they're able to make noise in the playoffs, if they can keep the band together for another year. And on to Brady's old team, the New England Patriots, who traveled to Miami and they got beat by the Dolphins 33-24. And so the Dolphins sweep the Pats. They end up with a winning record, but they fire Brian Flores anyways, which was a little surprising. It's probably the more surprising fire of Black Monday in the NFL. And it's just further proof that what we see on the field, what we see on the sidelines is only part of the equation. You look at, there's all these things happening behind the scenes. There's all the politics that goes into this, and we don't necessarily get to see that. But it's coming out now that Brian Flores, when the Dolphins sat in the top 5 in the draft a couple of years ago and they selected Tua, Brian Flores wanted Justin Herbert. The owner wanted Tua, and so the GM sided with the owner, and they saddled Flores with a quarterback that he didn't want, a quarterback he had a quick trigger on his rookie season, and frankly, a quarterback that looks awful in his second season. And so the Dolphins had to make a choice. They could keep the coach and ditch the quarterback, or they can try to bring in a new coach to fix the quarterback. And they ultimately elect to do that, letting Flores go. And so we'll see who they can bring in if they're able to construct an offense that will work good for Tua. Tua was 15 of 22 for 109 yards and a touchdown in this game. Really, all the Dolphins have been able to do to make Tua look decent this year is short RPO passing. And so can you build an entire offense around that in the NFL in 2022? I don't think you can. There's got to be more to it. But we'll see what they can bring in. I don't blame the Dolphins for making the move. I do think that Flores will get a head coaching job pretty quickly. I think there's a lot of teams that are going to be after him. And hopefully he'll go to a place with a quarterback that he can work with as well. Jalen Waddle ends the day with 5 catches for 27 yards. And again, you're just seeing this is the deep threat, the fastest guy in the draft. And he averaged like 5 yards per reception. And so his long reception was 9. They're just not pushing the ball downfield at all. But he does finish the year with 104 catches, which sets the NFL rookie record. And I believe that was breaking a record held by Anquan Bolden. Moving on, we've got the Saints at the Falcons, and the Saints win this game 30-20. They play 2 quarterbacks in this game. Taysom Hill starts out 7 of 9, and he throws a touchdown, and then he gets hurt. Trevor Siemian comes in and goes 9 of 15 and throws 2 touchdowns and finishes out the game. In this game, they finally got Alvin Kamara going. He broke 100 yards for the first time since week 14 with his 30 carries for 146 yards. Another interesting tidbit from this game is that Cameron Jordan sacked Matt Ryan in this game, which gave him 32 career sacks of Matt Ryan, the most that any defensive player has against any singular quarterback in his career. And so Matt Ryan may be seeing Cameron Jordan in his nightmares long after he retires. Moving on, we've got Green Bay at Detroit. This game was crazy. And so Aaron Rodgers plays the first half. He looks sharp, 14 of 18, 2 touchdowns. Jordan Love comes in and he tosses 2 picks. And so there's a Jordan Love conversation to be had as he, in the few opportunities he's had, have looked pretty poor. And so the Packers are going to have to figure that out this offseason with Aaron Rodgers eyeing the door. But the real story of this game was that the Lions just threw the kitchen sink at the Packers. They scored on a 75-yard wide receiver reverse pass, and they scored on an end around that turned into a flea flicker. And so a lot of creativity. The Lions cost themselves the number 1 overall pick. They're going to be at number 2 now because they won this game, but they don't care. This is a team that fought hard. This is a team that I think they've got a coach. I think they've got, some pieces. They obviously need the quarterback. They need to do some major roster rebuilding, but they're headed in the right direction. Amon-Ra St. Brown had 8 catches for 109 yards and a touchdown in this game, and that is his 6th straight game with 8 receptions, which breaks Calvin Johnson's record of 5 that he tied a week ago. On the Packers side, Devontae Adams set a franchise receiving record with 1,553 yards on the season, which was passing Jordy Nelson's old franchise record. And so again, like I said, going to be a lot of records being set over, this week, over future seasons, just by virtue of that extra game. Moving on, we have the Indianapolis Colts traveling to the Jacksonville Jaguars, a place that they have not won since 2014, and the streak continues. Jacksonville wins this game at 26-11. Trevor Lawrence, for the first time this season, really looks like the quarterback that was promised. He goes 23 of 32 for 223 yards and 2 touchdowns. Meanwhile, Carson Wentz, 17 of 29. He throws an interception. He has a QB rating of 4.4, and he lost a fumble on the day. And so Wentz was just vintage Wentz, a guy that melted in the spotlight, a guy that made clutch mistakes. He took 6 sacks in this game. And so the Jags came into this game with the worst turnover differential in the league, and they won the turnover battle, and they won the game. And it keeps the Indianapolis Colts out of the playoffs. And so you have to question at this point, if you aren't already, the general manager, Ballard's decision to trade what turned out to be a first-round pick and a non-playoff pick for Carson Wentz last offseason. He gave up a 3rd last draft and a first-rounder this draft for a quarterback that was incapable of replicating what an aging, dying Phillip Rivers did last year. And so Colts fans have to be pretty upset about that. To be honest, this might be one of the most embarrassing moments in this millennium for an NFL team. They came into the last 2 weeks, they needed one win, and they lost to two teams with interim coaches to close the year and miss the playoffs. And one of those teams is the worst team in the NFL. And so just a bad result for Colts fans, a great result for Eagles fans is now it's guaranteed that their pick will not be a playoff pick. And so the Eagles are going to have 2 picks in the teens, potentially 3 picks in the teens. If they were to lose to Tampa, they would have 19 overall as well. And so a happy day for Eagles fans on Sunday. Moving on to Washington at the Giants. Washington wins this game 22-7. Taylor Heineke is 9 of 18 passing. Jake Fromm is 15 of 31 passing with 2 picks. Not a great quarterbacking game. But Terry McLaurin, he gets his yards. He has 4 receptions for 93 yards. He becomes the first back-to-back 1,000-yard receiver for Washington since 1996. And Antonio Gibson and Terry McLaurin become the first running back wide receiver tandem to each cross 1,000 yards for the team since 2014 when Alfred Morris and Deshaun Jackson did it. The big note for this game, the punchline for this game, though, was the QB sneaks. If you didn't watch this game, on a 2nd and 10 from like their own 3-yard line, the Giants elected to do a quarterback sneak so they didn't take a safety. And then on 3rd and 9, they QB sneaked again. And it's just the epitome of giving up. That's just pathetic. Joe Judge is the first Giants coach to ever lose 13 games in a season. And he can talk about a foundation all that he wants, and the foundation's not there. And I think the Giants brass finally saw that, and they fired Joe Judge yesterday, which was really sad for NFC East fans that were pretty sure that Judge was going to stay and keep the Giants a laughingstock. So maybe now they'll get a real coach and they'll have a chance. I don't know. They've got to figure out what to do at quarterback. They've got a lot of holes on that roster. They do have 2 top 10 picks, though. And so there's some moves that can be made there. You could infuse this roster with some talent and hopefully a real NFL coach, and the Giants could become a competitive team. Moving on, we've got the Titans at the Texans, a game that started out as a blowout and then turned into a really close game. Houston outscored Tennessee 25-7 in the second half, and they almost won this game. It's almost like they were just teasing the Chiefs to make them think they could get the 1 seed. Ryan Tannehill has one of his best passing performances of the year. He threw for 287 yards and 4 touchdowns with no interceptions and 92 quarterback rating. Davis Mills is pretty good too. He goes 23 of 33 for 301 yards and 3 touchdowns and a 69.6 quarterback rating. And so we've talked about it on this podcast before. It's conceivable that Davis Mills could be the guy for Houston. Now, you would like to see it over a longer stretch of time, but I think he's earned the right to be the quarterback for next year for the Texans, as they try to get him some help, as they try to build out a team around him. Give him a year. If it doesn't work out, maybe you can try in a little bit deeper quarterback class next season. The Titans in this game, they become the 1 seed. They clinch it despite not having a 1,000-yard rusher or a 1,000-yard receiver. The last team to do that in the NFL was the 2017 Eagles. And I think we all know how that turned out. And so watch the Titans in the playoffs here. They're going to get the bye. They're going to get Derrick Henry back, and they're going to try to make a run and become the second team to do that. Moving on, we have the Steelers at the Ravens. This game was a nail-biter. It went into overtime. It cost me my Steelers future bet. I tweeted out 2 weeks ago on Monday morning that I had the Steelers under 8.5 wins, and it was going to cash, and I forgot they played on Monday Night Football. I thought it was impossible for them to win too. Forgot they played Monday night. I thought they'd already played, and so they won. They won again to make me take that tweet back. And so I had missed that futures bet, but I hit my other 3. And the Steelers win this game. They clinch a playoff spot with a Chris Boswell game-winning field goal in overtime. Big Ben goes 30 of 44 passing for 244 yards. Tyler Huntley had a really bad game. He completes under 50% of his passes, and he throws 2 interceptions. The Steelers' run game did not do anything today. Najee Harris had 11 carries for 28 yards. Snell Jr. had 12 carries for 22 yards. And there was just nothing going there. This is a merciful end to the Ravens season, as they've been so banged up. They hope they can reload and they can come back next year. The Steelers, though, they're going to try to make a run in the playoffs here, and they've got a tough matchup against the Chiefs, and we'll see what they can do. Big Ben in this game, he was 25 of 31 on passes that traveled less than 10 yards, and so he can't push the ball downfield at this point in his career. It's all quick passing. That's all the offensive line affords him time to do anyways. And Ben, in this game, he picked up his 57th game-winning drive, which breaks a tie with Peyton Manning and Drew Brees for second most. And so Big Ben has the second most game-winning drives in NFL history. He trails Tom Brady, who has 67. And so I don't think he is going to be able to catch that, even if he comes back for another year. Moving on, we have the Jets at the Bills. The Jets lose this game 27-10. Zach Wilson was just bad. 7 of 20 passing for 87 yards. He attempted 20 passes, and he had 87 yards. He took 9 sacks for 79 yards. And so on the day, he attempted 20 passes, and he had 5 net passing yards. That's just unbelievably poor. Josh Allen, he aired the ball out 45 times, completed a very, very low percentage of his passes, but he did get 2 interceptions. He had 2 touchdowns, He had no interceptions. And in this game, the Jets didn't cross midfield until almost halftime. They didn't have a possession longer than 6 plays all game. And like I said before, they had 5 net passing yards. So a merciful end to the season for the Jets, who need to get to the offseason, and they're going to have to figure out if they think Zach Wilson can be a guy to build around. Moving on, we have the Bengals at the Browns. The Bengals rest a lot of their starters. The Browns don't have Baker Mayfield. Case Keenum goes 17 of 24 for 176 yards and 2 touchdowns. The Browns win 21-16. Maybe they should have been playing Keenum over Baker for a while. That's certainly something that's going to be talked about throughout the offseason. Jamar Chase gets 2 receptions for 26 yards, and he sets the Bengals' single-season receiving record with 1,455 yards. And that's not a rookie record. That is their single-season record for all time. And so he's already had the best season that any receiver in Bengals history ever has. And now they're going to look to see if they can win a playoff game with that Burrow to Chase connection. Moving on, we have the 49ers at the Rams. The 49ers win this one 27-24 in overtime. The 49ers fell behind 17-0 in this game, but they came roaring back and they win the game in overtime. This becomes the largest blown lead by the Rams in the Sean McVay era. Matthew Stafford tosses 2 picks in this game. He can't stop turning the ball over, and this is the team that you want to face in the playoffs. I'm convinced that the Rams are the team that everybody wants in the first round, just because they can't stop turning the ball over. Jimmy G was awful early in the game, but he led 3 touchdown drives in the second half, and then he leads the field goal drive in overtime. He ends 23 of 32 passing for 316 yards with 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions. And Deebo Samuel even got in on the passing game. Goes 1 of 1 for 24 yards and a touchdown, and that elusive 100 QBR. According to Next Gen Stats in this game, the 49ers had a 0.4% chance to win after they punted down 7 with 1:50 remaining, and they came back to 1. That makes it the most improbable victory, the most improbable comeback since the stat has been tracked starting in 2016. So this was a wild game. If you have not watched it, go check out the condensed version on Game Pass, or just check out the whole game and skip to like the last 5 minutes. Just a crazy, crazy finish. Up next, we have Seattle at Arizona. Seattle wins this game 38-30. Russell Wilson tosses 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. Rashad Penny rushes for almost 200 yards. His 190 yards on 23 carries is a career high, and he's had over 100 yards in 4 of his last 5 games. And so he begins to look like a piece that, the Seahawks could build around, and a piece that they wish they'd gotten going earlier in the season. Seattle scored on 7 out of 10 drives in this game. 5 of them went over 60 yards. And so the Cardinals can't feel good about this. Their defense had a decent showing against the Cowboys last week. and it's right back to where they are. The Cardinals have now lost 4 out of their last 5 as they head into the playoff, and there are serious concerns about them. This is also a team, to be honest, that teams should want to face. I think if you're looking at teams you want to face in the playoffs, the Rams and the Cards are the top 2 on the list. And then we move on to the Sunday night game. This game, there was a lot of talk heading into it. The teams could just kneel this out. They could go to, take a 0-0 tie, and they would both make the playoffs. Or they could play, and the winner would be in, the loser would be out, and the Steelers would be the second team to make it. And so, they were never going to do that. I don't know why the box score is not loading. They were never going to do that, obviously. I would have loved to have seen it, though. You could have done some crazy stuff. Like, you could have just had to take a snap and just stand there for 15 minutes and do that 4 plays, and it could be the first time ever that one team had 0 time of possession. Could have been some weird stuff that happened here, but ultimately integrity of the game, all that, yada, yada, they played out, and it ends up going into overtime. Now, there's a lot of talk about the timeout in overtime by Brandon Staley. It looked like the Raiders were content to take the tie until Staley took the timeout, and then they picked up a first down and kicked the field goal. And that's probably a bad call in that situation, but let's focus on instead. Let's talk about Derek Carr. Derek Carr, who overcame so much this season. The Raiders get off to the quick start, and then all the stuff comes out about John Gruden, and he is rightfully fired. And the team is reeling, but they rally around Bisaccia, and they win a couple of games. And then you have the whole thing go down with Henry Ruggs, and he's no longer with the team. And just all of the hits that have come. And Derek Carr has led this team. They've overcome so much. And now Derek Carr is set to play in his first playoff game. Now, he's led the Raiders to the playoffs before, but he got injured in the second to last week of the season, and he didn't get to play. He broke his leg. I think it was in 2016. I can't remember for sure. This will be Carr's first playoff game. There's a lot of emotion that goes into that for a guy that's been with this organization. His contract is lapsing after this year. Who knows who the head coach is going to be? Who knows if he will be back? But he gets a chance to go represent the Raiders in the playoffs. Maybe make a push. Maybe solidify Bisaccia's job. Maybe solidify himself as the starter next year. There's a lot of things up in the air. But you can't help but feel good for Derek Carr and pull for this guy as they head into the playoffs. Max Crosby just went off in this game for the Raiders. He ends the day with 6 tackles, 2 sacks, 3 tackles for loss, 3 passes defense, 4 QB hits, and he had 11 QB pressures of Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert, who, by the way, is a football god. You guys, if you listen to the podcast, you know that I am so high on Justin Herbert. I think he is a top 5 quarterback. I think he's one of the best young quarterbacks in the league. Some of the throws he made in this game were just absurd. Like, you can go hunt for the clips on Twitter. There's one he made, rolling out to the right, and he pegs it in on the sideline. There's another one that he makes, shifting left, avoiding pressure, and he layers it, over a linebacker in front of a safety in a small window because there's a corner following. It's just an incredible throw. He made throws in this game that there's only one other quarterback in the league who can make, and that's Patrick Mahomes. Down 29-14 in the fourth quarter, Herbert led them back, and he got this game to overtime. The Chargers were 6 of 7 on fourth down conversions in this game, which was just an absurd statistic. Staley was going for it, at will, and Herbert was converting. And it's a shame we're not going to see this team in the playoffs. It's a shame that the Steelers are going to be in, who are kind of a dead team walking, over the Chargers, who I think could have made some noise. But the Chargers didn't take care of business, and the Steelers did. And so that's the way it goes. I think the Chargers are the better team, but they'll get another shot next year. Hopefully Brandon Staley will learn from this year. I don't think he did the best job coaching this year. I think he did good with aggressiveness, but I think he's got a lot of room to learn. I think he's got a lot of room to build out his defense. He's got to get used to not having Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey to disguise the weaknesses of his defense. And so I think the Chargers can learn from this. They're a team that I love to watch. I love to root for. And I think as long as Justin Herbert's at the helm, this team is going to be really, really good. And I'm really excited to watch Justin Herbert and Patrick Mahomes play in the same division for the next decade plus. We talk about the glory days of Peyton Manning and Tom Brady matchups, but they weren't even in the same division. We're going to get Mahomes and Herbert matching up twice a year for the foreseeable future, and I can't wait to watch how that plays out. And so that's all the games from Week 18. The playoff matchups are now set. Saturday in the 4:30 slot, the Raiders travel to Cincinnati to play the Bengals. At 8:15, New England plays Buffalo in Buffalo. For the third time this year, they will match up. Sunday at 1 o'clock, Philadelphia travels to Tampa, where there's supposed to be a lot of inclement weather in that game. At 4:30, San Francisco travels to Dallas. At 8:15, Pittsburgh travels to Kansas City. And then Monday night is Arizona at LA for the third time this season as well. And so a lot to get into on those games. We'll get into it later in this week. I'll be back on Friday to do a preview show for you guys, and we're going to go more in depth on these games than I normally do. When we've got a full slate, we'll have a little more time. So be sure you tune in for that. And then the last thing I want to talk about as we wrap up here is the current open jobs in the NFL. And so there are a total of 7 NFL head coaching vacancies right now. The Jags obviously fired Urban Meyer earlier in the season. The Raiders fired Gruden in season. Maybe Bisaccia is the replacement. He's interim right now. We won't know anything until the playoff run is over, but it would be hard for me to replace him after he gets into the playoffs, especially if they win a playoff game, but we'll see. The Broncos fired Fangio. The Vikings fired Zimmer and their GM. The Dolphins fired Flores. The Bears fired Nagy, and the Giants fired Joe Judge, sadly. So just a few thoughts on each of these teams in terms of how desirable they are. I think the Jags are a pretty desirable job here. They have Trevor Lawrence, who's supposedly the greatest QB prospect of a generation, and they have the number 1 overall pick. They've got a first-round running back coming back off of an injury in Travis Etienne, and so it's a team that has a lot of holes, but they've got a lot of capital. And with that number 1 overall pick, it's unfortunate that there is not a clear and away like QB1 in this draft, like a Trevor Lawrence that you could trade that pick for a ton. But you have guys like Kevon Thibodeau and Aiden Hutchinson who may rise up into that Chase Young, level of respect, and maybe you could trade that pick back. Or maybe a team falls in love with the quarterback, or maybe you just take one of those elite edge rushers. It'll be interesting to see how the Jags play out. I do think this is a desirable position, despite the fact that they have not been a winning team in a long time. I think Doug Peterson's a great fit here. They need a guy who's going to come in and instill the culture and work with a quarterback. And we know players love Doug Peterson. We know he's good with quarterbacks. And so I love that fit. I'd love to see Doug Peterson in Jacksonville. For the Raiders, I won't talk about them too much because I don't know if they're going to be open or not. But they're going to have to make a decision on Derek Carr. They've got to make a decision on Bisaccia. And we'll follow that as it goes and talk about it once we know a little more. The Broncos fire Vic Fangio. The Broncos really have all the pieces they need except for a quarterback, and they haven't had a quarterback in so long. I mean, if you take out Peyton Manning signing there, which, obviously you can't do that, but is Jay Cutler the last good quarterback they had? It's been a long time in Denver since they've had a good quarterback. And so they've got all the other weapons. They've got wide receiver weapons. They've got a good defense. They've got a good enough offensive line. Their running game is fine. You just need a quarterback. And so it's not the best year to know that you need a quarterback because it's not the best QB draft. I really wish they'd taken Justin Fields last draft because I think the team would be in a whole different place, and Fangio may have even kept his job. But I think this is a desirable place because you get to presumably pick your quarterback and you get to go from there. The problem there is that you really only get one shot as a coach with a rookie quarterback. And so if you pick the wrong one, you're probably done. So it adds some uncertainty, but I do think the Broncos are a good spot, even though they are in such a difficult division. So they would be closer to the bottom on my list. The Vikings fired Zimmer and Spielman. They're going to have to make a decision on Kirk Cousins. This team has a lot of talent. Justin Jefferson's one of the best receivers in the league. The problem there becomes the Kirk Cousins conundrum. Kirk Cousins already lost one coach and GM his job. Is another coach going to come in and want to keep him? Because if so, what makes you think that you can get more out of Cousins? And if not, you're back in that place of trying to get a quarterback in the middle of the draft, in the middle of the first round of the draft, and you only get one shot at that. So the Vikings would be more favorable to me than the Broncos because of the division and because of some of the established weapons they have. But again, you're in that quarterback situation. So the Dolphins fired Brian Flores. This is a team that has a lot of weapons on. They've got a really good defense. Flores did a great job with the defense. Jalen Waddle is legit. But the problem is they need a lot of offensive line help. Their offensive line is atrocious. And I think Tua is just not a good quarterback. And so if you believe in Tua, this could be a good job for you because all you would need to do is fix the offensive line. But if you don't believe in Tua, you're already going to be butting heads with the ownership, just like Flores was. And so this is going to take somebody who believes they can fix Tua. It would not be a job that I would want because I don't believe in him. The Bears finally mercifully fired Matt Nagy. And so they've got their quarterback in Justin Fields. They need to bring in a guy that can work with him. Again, it's been another great landing spot for Doug Peterson. He would do really well with Justin Fields. We'll see how it all plays out. But if I'm Doug Peterson and I'm picking, I want to go to Chicago or I want to go to Jacksonville. And then you go to the Giants, who fired Joe Judge. Dave Gettleman retired. He was fired. This is a team that's a little bit interesting. I don't think they're the worst roster. I don't think they're great. They need a lot of help on the offensive line. I don't think Saquon Barkley will ever be what he was again. I don't think that you should pay him, even if he does become what he was once again, because it's a bad use of resources. And I really don't think Daniel Jones is the guy. But the Giants are sitting there with 2 picks in the top 10. And so they could go get a quarterback. They could go make a play for a Russell Wilson who would like to be in a big market in New York. They could try to make a play for an Aaron Rodgers. They could go for a guy like Kirk Cousins if he became available. Baker Mayfield. There's a lot of QB names out there, a lot of dominoes to fall, but I don't think Daniel Judge is it. Daniel Jones is it. And I do think they have a lot of holes. So the Giants will be an interesting one to watch as well, to see what kind of coach and GM they can attract with all of those picks. We've got a long-time listener, Joe Ciccoletti on YouTube, chimes in and says, the Broncos and Miami have the best scenarios for a head coach coming in. Both rosters are loaded up and down, but decision at QB is the biggest question marks. Both teams could look to trade for a vet. And yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, the Miami Dolphins, they have a really good defense. They have a legit weapon in Waddle. The Broncos have weapons all over the field in a defense. Both of them need a quarterback. I think the problem in Miami is that Flores was fired because he didn't want Tua. And I think that they are going to want to bring in someone who will work with Tua. And I would not want to saddle myself with Tua because I don't think he's the guy. And so that's why I would put them down a little lower on my list. So I guess in terms of if I was a head coaching candidate, I think the Jags would be high on my list. Jags, Vikings, Bears, Broncos would probably be my top tier. And then, the Dolphins would be down there. The Giants would be at the very bottom. So I would knock Denver down just a little bit for the fact that they play with perennial playoff contenders in the Chargers and the Raiders, and they play with a perennial Super Bowl contender in the Chiefs. So probably the toughest division. That's going to be a hard division to win. Probably going to be a hard place to have winning records. But we'll get more into the coaching carousel. That's kind of Mark's wheelhouse. So when he's with us next time, we'll break down some different candidates. We'll follow all of the interviews and all of the rumors. And we'll be back on Friday. I'll be back to break down all of these playoff games for you. We'll go in depth on the matchups, what different teams can exploit, what you can expect to see to get you guys ready for the first round of the playoffs. And so thank you guys for joining us for episode 37 of Chalk Talk. Thanks. Shout out to Darth Poole and Joe for chiming in the chat. If you guys enjoyed what you heard on the show, and I know that you do, be sure you smash that subscribe button so you don't miss the next episode. Drop us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. You can follow me on Twitter at @halfandhalf_TPL. I'll be tweeting out stuff all through the games and leading up to them. And so from me, from Mark, from the Painted Lines, we'll see you guys next time.